Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video number 325. It is amusing when certain Christian groups and individuals spurn the use of the term Judeochristian. It's almost like they have a problem with Jews. I think we've isolated the situation for some people. I realize some people are talking about the puristic use of the term. Torba talks about this on a regular basis. Here's what I would say. The term itself is quite simple. Judeo-Christian, essentially the fusion faith, you could call it, that really, it starts with Judaism, it goes through Christianity. In some cases, you could say variants of Islam, at least, are kind of associated, although those borrow even more paganism, particularly from the Sabaeans and groups like that. So that would generally be spurned by the average Jew and by the average Christian. The reason why is, if you look at the main text for Christians to read and to use for their life, the Old Testament was written by Jews, the entire first part of it. The Savior that they worship was a Jew. Now, I'm not saying Jew in the sense of like a Pharisee or something. I believe that Jesus, if he existed and isn't just an adaptation of Apollonius, was an Essene, he was a mystic. Therefore, he didn't really practice Judaism as it was practiced in that day. Like he wouldn't be acting like a modern Ashkenazi Orthodox Jew, probably did not go around in the yarmulke, etc., 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 would have led more of a kind of Greek-ish style philosopher's life, if anything. Again, assuming that this figure existed and isn't an adaptation of Apollonius or some other contemporary similar figure. But he would have been ethnically Jewish. This is pretty well established. The framing of even the New Testament, by and large, takes place, again, in a region in the world that's run by Judaism, among people who, at least initially, were Jews. Later on, you get the rise of Christianity. Now, not everyone that formed the early church or was part of that movement was Jewish. Many of those people came from Rome at large, which means there were people of various background. There were early Christians that hailed from Egypt. They didn't know anything about Judaism. There were those that came from Rome, or what the provinces of Italy, rather, or Spain, or you know, modern-day Morocco, or Germany, Gaul. They were all over the place. Christianity began spreading. And so when you're looking at the 300s AD, roughly, like the canonization of official texts and so forth, for the first few hundred years, you get this more loose adaptation. You have literature floating around, and you have different subgroups of Christianity, partially tribal in nature. Part of it is based on location. So the kind of Christianity that tends to develop in a place like Egypt might not be the same as the kind that develops in a place like Gaul. It develops in what's now Germany, or develops in you know, what's now Britain. That's not necessarily the case. When it all gets refused together, though, the majority of that work, and certainly the entire Old Testament, is Jewish in derivation. There are some Christians that, because of their personal feelings, especially regarding the modern state of Israel, which, you can't blame them, because, trust me, hundreds of thousands of Orthodox Jews protest on a regular basis against Israeli policy. That's because they understand that it's not canonical. They're actually heretical. I mean, technically speaking, according to a proper understanding of what we would consider more religious Judaism, the current incarnation of the Israeli government would be considered of Satan. It would be literally considered to be devil worship after a fashion, because it's deliberately trying to resist the reinstallation of a religious state in Israel. It's got a secular, a worldly government, a cosmopolitan government that at least feigns tolerance of various groups within. Of course, is not ethnically based at this point. A large proportion of the Israeli government, there are some that are Arabic. There are some people that are from Eastern Europe. I think Netanyahu, wasn't he originally from Poland, if I remember correctly? Something like that, for several generations. And then, does the right of return thing, but, had been, had a family lineage absent from the Levant for how many hundreds of years? This is the case for a large proportion there. Well, if you look at the fucking the Midrash and the Torah and all of this other stuff within Judaism, you wouldn't even think that it's necessarily, it's certainly not biblical. In form, you don't even have the third temple, so fundamentally can't be. There are groups that are trying to usher that in. Some Christians will deem that the herald of the Antichrist, and certainly certain Islamic groups are looking for the coming of Dajjal and then the Mahdi, so they're concerned as well. There's a reason the Dome of the Rock is still there. But it's amusing because normally when the term is spurned, one of two things happens. Either it's pointed out that the initial usage of the term was morphed in the 20th century, and therefore the entire premise is thrown out, even though the initial premise can be the use of that term, which is just, hey, your religion was initially, if you look at the Old Testament materials, you're talking about predominantly Jewish people. Jewish writers writing about Jewish things within a Jewish land at that time. Or, number two, it's for cultural and political reasons and doesn't even have to do with the doctrine. And I'm wondering, are there any Christian groups that ignore the Old Testament? I know you would say the Old Testament dispensation is gone. We have Christ now. That's true according to certain interpretations of the actual doctrine. Although there's a contradiction there because Jesus comes not to get rid of the law but to fulfill it. And Paul disagrees, apparently, and you have a million different analyses on that. Christianity is a very complex religion because you have so many offshoots off that initial origin. The initial Nicene sort of Gnostic pre-Catholic exposition period, and then the Catholics solidify, actually. You have that happen. You have Rome turning into a Christian country for the first time much later, and then it becomes legalized. But the term Judeochristian is spurned by certain groups of people. Then, at the other end of the spectrum, you also have Christians that are they consider themselves Zionistic. Again, despite the fact that certain interpretations of the actual doctrine would say, no, that is now heretical and of the past, with the exception of the historical meaning of Genesis or Exodus or something. None of that applies anymore because you got Jesus. You've got your Messiah. He has come. Why are you still talking about the chosen people when now you have this cosmopolitan religion that deems that every person in the world is chosen, potentially assuming that they do the right works and or have the right faith and or through grace and or through a million other things. That would be a more canonical interpretation. Again, it depends on interpretation so heavily that really any opinion that you can have can be had. Depending on what importance you give to which parts of the Bible and which parts you listen to more, you almost end up having to subjugate one book to another, or one section to another, or one law to another. And, you convene a group of learned gentlemen and they'll come to totally different conclusions about how that schema should work. This has been a problem. That's why Christians butchered one another for so long. Oh, you're a Protestant, I'm a Catholic. I have the true cross, and you're heretical, and Luther's nuts. Oh no, you're nuts, you papist. You get all this bullshit, and then people kill the Jews and kill the Muslims, and they're killing each other, and killing Christians, and killing some Hindus, and very, very interesting doctrinal disagreements. I just thought that I would point this out. Again, Judaism is the predominant basis of the majority of the books in the Bible. That much is clear. At what point would that term therefore be defensively denied? It'd be it'd be something to talk about with maybe a more zealous Christian sometime. That's about all. Peace out.